Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of P.A.S. Report Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giordano. As always, make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. Share this episode with family and friends and on social media. And I'll tell you, this has been a busy week. We kicked off Monday with an interview with Dinesh D'Souza on his upcoming film, Police State, and how the United States, we continue to slip further and further towards authoritarianism. If you haven't listened to that episode, I suggest you do. Check it out. It's on every podcast platform. I also have it up on YouTube and Rumble. So just type in @PAS Report because it's really important what he's doing. Yesterday, I released an episode, and I wanted to give my thoughts on the deadly Hamas attacks on Israel and Israel's declaration of war. And I'm disgusted. I'm seeing a lot of academics come out and just express anti-Semitism. And not only that, they want to create some type of moral equivalency to Hamas and Israel. There is no moral equivalency. Let's be clear about that. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas has slaughtered people. The numbers are over 1,000 people slaughtered. 40 babies they found killed. Some of them beheaded, decapitated. These people, they're not animals, they're monsters, and they need to be eradicated. So enough with this moral equivalency. It's shameful, and they have no business in being in academia. Now, they do have a right to say it. That's what free speech is all about. If they want to put out their hate, they have a right to say it, but we also have a right to expose them for who they really are. So yesterday I talked about this and I explained the dangers, that this war is much bigger than people realize and that there are major geopolitical implications that too many are ignoring. It's so many levels to this. It goes far beyond the normal Israeli-Palestinian conflict that we're used to seeing over the last few decades. And you're going to want to check out that episode because you need to know how high the stakes are. You need to know what can happen. This war can quickly escalate and expand beyond its borders, engulfing the entire Middle East. And who do you think that's going to draw in? Of course, it's going to draw the United States in. So if you haven't checked out that episode, make sure you check it out. Today, I'm going to focus on the domestic side of things. As of this recording, we still don't have a Speaker of the House. Now, is that a big deal? Does this show that Republicans are divided and incompetent? Does it show that Republicans are unable to govern, that it's, chaos within the system? Or is this much ado about nothing? There are a couple pieces to this that I'm going to explain in the second half of the show. But first, I want to focus on something that's very important, much more important. A story that should frighten every American, regardless of political ideology. Over the last 2 decades, we have witnessed the federal bureaucracy being infected by ideology, politically weaponized to target anyone that dissents from a particular narrative. And I've been screaming about this. I warned about the ideological corruption. I warned about the abuses of power. And I've done it on many of the episodes. That's the main reason I started this podcast, because I'm worried. Because I see these abuses, and then I see so many Americans with their heads buried in the sand, or simply they don't care. Some of them just don't care because it's targeting people they politically disagree with. Others just don't care because they think there's nothing they can do about it. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to sit here and see my country slip away. I'm not ready to surrender my country to an authoritarian system where the government can determine what we could think, what we could believe, what we could say, what we could see. The government itself has weaponized the idea of terrorism, and I warned how the threat of domestic terrorism was being used as a pretext for something much bigger. I warned how they were using it to usurp power and target anyone who dissents from a particular narrative. I warned about how the Biden administration's national strategy for countering domestic terrorism is actually lowering the threshold of what constitutes domestic terrorism and extremism. Something that has always concerned me about this document was it's essentially a political document disguised as a strategy. And it grants new powers to the government, powers that they could easily abuse. And we're witnessing those abuses day in and day out. I worked on numerous government documents before. So understand, I know how the game is played. You craft these documents, and you have to be a wordsmith. Every word, every phrase, every sentence, there's an intent behind it. So when we were doing emergency management after action reports, and we were developing emergency operations plans, we would never use the word have, that officials have to do something. We said may, should, will consider. And the reason is because you don't want to pigeonhole them into a particular action, that if they don't do that action, well, then they could open themselves up to liability. So it's a game. And there's an intention behind it. What's written in and what's left out, it's done on purpose. Before the documents are released, it's going to go through dozens of hands that are going to comb over this document, tying up any loose ends. And officials, what they're trying to do with this national strategy is redefine what domestic terrorism actually is, what it actually means. They want to redefine who can be considered a domestic terrorist. They want to lower the threshold to kick off investigations because then it beefs up their number, it justifies the amount of money that's being poured in, it creates a narrative that people should live in fear that domestic terrorism can impact their lives any second of any day and that you always have to worry about it. And prior to 2021, a potential domestic violent extremist or DVE was someone who engaged in anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists. However, what the national strategy has done, it lowers the threshold. They dropped the word violent and they replaced the word extremism with sentiment. So now anyone who exhibits any anti-government, anti-authority sentiment can be considered a potential domestic violent extremist. They don't define what constitutes anti-government. I mean, I routinely criticize government. I look at it as my obligation, whether it's inside the classroom or outside the classroom. We have to question government. We have to criticize government. So does that make me anti-government? Am I calling for the overthrow of government? No, I'm not. I'm just simply criticizing it. But it's so open-ended that any criticism of the government itself can be declared domestic terrorism. When it comes to anti-authority, if you read through the national strategy, I brought it up before, it talks about those that perceive the government as overreaching. Now, what does that actually mean? And who gets to determine whether the government is overreaching or not? Well, according to the national strategy, of course, those in power that are abusing their power are the ones that get to determine whether or not government's abusing its power. And what does anti-authority actually mean? Like, obviously, if you've been listening to this podcast, I was completely against every single mandate that came out during COVID. I was someone that, from the very onset, was criticizing the government, was criticizing the measures, saying that governors were acting as little Mussolini wannabes by implementing these mandates, by bypassing state legislative bodies. So because I didn't want to comply with those government mandates, the governor's mandates, does that make me anti-authority? And that's the question that needs to be asked. Nobody asks these questions, of course. But it has far-reaching consequences, and we're seeing those consequences in real time. We're seeing how they're playing out. There was an exclusive story in Newsweek, and it's exactly what I've been warning you about, as they truly believe the BS that they peddle. And I'm going to discuss it when we get back from this quick break, so hang tight. P.A.S. Report listeners, hurricane season is almost here, and the time to prepare is right now, not when the hurricane hits. When Hurricane Ida hit the Gulf Coast, it destroyed countless homes and left many without access to food and clean water. Millions lost power, some for weeks. The floods that followed the hurricane washed out roads, made it impossible for grocery stores to restock their shelves. Families were desperate. They were waiting for help that was slow to arrive. But what if you didn't have to rely on FEMA to provide for your family during a crisis? The answer is simple. Be prepared with emergency food kits from 4 Patriots. Their long-lasting and delicious food options are specifically designed to provide you and your loved ones with the sustenance you need when you need it most. And these food kits are hand-packed in the USA, last up to 25 years, compact inside covert storage totes, include a wide variety of delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and they're backed by thousands of 5-star customer reviews. 4 Patriots survival food is not just for natural disasters. In today's world of uncertain supply chains and unpredictable emergencies, it's more important than ever to have a backup plan. Whether it's temporary power outage, a winter blizzard, rising food costs, you can rest easy knowing that you have a reliable source of food to see you through. And right now, you go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including the emergency food supply kits that are designed to last up to 25 years. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriots survival food. Welcome back, everyone. In recent years, we've witnessed a concerning shift in how the government addresses dissenting voices. If you take a look at this Newsweek piece that I alluded to before the break, you'll find it validates everything. Apparently, MAGA now actually has its own threat tag inside the FBI. And what's frightening is how many people just go along with it. How many people actually will sit there and buy into the BS, and then how many of the bureaucrats actually believe the BS that they're peddling? It's crazy because the message is clear. conform to their vision of what a Republican is or risk being branded an anti-government, anti-authority, MAGA extremist, racist bigot. You are an enemy of the state at that point. You know, the government is now attempting to dictate what political beliefs are acceptable and which ones aren't. I mean, this is George Orwell stuff. You know, the dystopia of 1984, it's actually reality now. And it's not some grassroots movement that pushed this. It's not just far-left loons who have power that's pushing this. This rhetoric is coming from the highest levels, and it's coming from across the political spectrum, including the White House. Here's President Biden himself with a stark warning about the perceived threat of MAGA. Take a listen.
As I stand here tonight, equality and democracy are under assault. We do ourselves no favor to pretend otherwise. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republican. And that is a threat to this country.
So according to President Biden, if you're a Republican that does what a Democrat wants, then you're an okay Republican. Then you're a moderate Republican. But if you don't, well, that's where, you know, you're a domestic terrorist. And understand, you know, people will be like, oh, you're taking it too far. You're taking it out of context and blah, blah, blah. No. What are we preaching here? We're preaching limited government, right? I mean, you know, we're preaching to try and take power away from the federal government, return it back to the states where it belongs. We're preaching that we don't want nonsense being taught in our schools, that we want to focus on actual education as proficiency levels are at their all-time lows. So it's not like we're taking unreasonable, crazy positions, but you're deemed as an extremist if you dissent from their narrative. And that wasn't the only time President Biden used this rhetoric. He's using it in speech after speech after speech. He's going around the country in speech after speech and speech saying the same thing. Now, we all know that President Biden just reads what he's told. He reads the script, he reads from the teleprompter, and it's the other people, the people that are really in charge. And it reveals the mindset of those in the White House. It reveals the mindset of those that are in charge of our institutions within government. And this rhetoric, I mean, it raises a fundamental question. If this perceived threat is really as substantial as they claim, like if MAGA really poses this existential threat to the United States, if they really pose an existential threat to our republic, our democracy as they claim, well then, don't you have to deal with it decisively? I mean, if it truly represents an evil as they're putting out there, when you say you have this existential threat, well, it's an existential threat to the existence of the United States. Don't you have to destroy and eliminate the threat? And that's exactly what they want to do. That's why I'm telling you to wake up. For years, Democrats, bureaucrats, the establishment types, they've been conditioning the American people. They've been crafting a narrative that attempts to label anyone who dissents as a domestic enemy. And it started with labeling the opposition racist long before Trump was even in office. Don't forget, you know, George W. Bush was labeled a racist. McCain was labeled as a racist. The Democrats' new favorite Republican, Mitt Romney, was labeled a racist. They were labeled bigots. They were labeled as people that hate. Now, it started there, and then it morphed. It morphed around Trump. Not only are you a racist, but if you support Trump, you're supporting Russia, and you must hate America. And then it grew more ominous. Then you became a domestic enemy, right? You had Speaker Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, warning about the enemies from within. And that's exactly what she said, the enemies from within. And she said the White House and Congress. And she went so far as to brand duly elected members of Congress as domestic enemies. Now she has to work with these people. She had to negotiate with them. She's the Speaker of the whole House, not just the Democrat Party. And she's saying that my political opposition are domestic enemies. Well, how can you negotiate with that? You can't. You got to destroy it. And that's what it's about. Just the other day, you had Hillary Clinton rear her ugly head once again, giving her thoughts. It was Deplorables 2.0. And she gave her thoughts on what the government should be doing about anyone who dares to support the former president. Take a listen.
Very strong partisans in both parties in the past, and we had very bitter battles over all kinds of things, gun control and climate change and the economy and taxes. But there wasn't this little tail of extremism wagging the dog of the Republican Party as it is today. And sadly, so many of those extremists, those MAGA extremists, take their marching orders from Donald Trump, who has no credibility left by any measure. He's only in it for himself. He's now defending himself in civil actions and criminal actions. And when do they break with him? Because at some point, maybe there needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members, but something needs to happen.
And how do
These people are sick. They're sick. The rhetoric employed by officials in politics, it's not only deeply concerning, it's downright dangerous. What the hell does formal deprogramming really mean? What are we talking about here? Are we talking about official government policy when we use the word formal? I mean, that's what formal would be, that the government develops a policy to deprogram individuals. Are we talking about re-education camps? When we're referring to Trump supporters, the left and the establishment, they constantly use words like purge, deprogram, re-educate, eliminate. They're trying to classify them as subhuman. Now think about what they're saying. But it's not really about stifling the voices of those who support Trump. What it's really about is silencing dissenting opinions. That's what it's really about. It's funny how the ones always warning about the threat to democracy, the very people who accuse their political opposition of being fascist at every turn, they're going to usher in authoritarianism. They're going to bring in authoritarianism because they're calling for power to be taken away from the federal government. So because we're calling for power and limited government, a return to limited government, that's bringing in authoritarianism. But it's funny because they always accuse their opponents of being fascists, and they're the very people that want to silence, purge, deprogram, and re-educate anyone who disagrees with them. That sounds pretty fascist to me. That sounds like communist China to me. But understand, half these people, they envy the power the communist regime of China has. Because we have to be clear about this. If someone poses a genuine threat to anyone and to the system, we already have laws in place to address it. We already have laws. We're hearing about an increase in threats against political officials, members of the media, increase in threats against the FBI. Well, if anyone makes a threat, that's a crime. Where are all the arrests? Where are the mass arrests? That's what I want to know. If someone makes a violent threat, we have laws on the books to tackle that. And if the threat is so large, where are all the arrests? It really is that simple. And it's easy. This is not a case that requires, thousands of investigatory hours. It doesn't require surveillance. If someone puts out a message, sends an email, writes a letter, puts out a tweet or a Facebook post threatening the FBI, public officials, members of the media, they could be arrested. Where are the arrests? The FBI and the other agencies, they want to continually lower the bar. They want to manipulate data in order to pursue investigations. They lower the threshold for investigations without providing any clear definition of the supposed threat. But that's the point, right? Make it as vague as possible, and you could apply it to anyone and anything. They don't want to define this amorphous threat. I mean, let's look at reality. 75 million people voted for the former president. If we take 50% of those that voted for him, 50%, and we put them in the extremist category, that's over 37 million Americans. Now, surely, if 37 million Americans were that extreme, if they were that intent on destruction, surely we would have witnessed the effects of all that extremism, now wouldn't we? I mean, there would have to be some successful attacks, wouldn't there? With that many people involved, wouldn't we be witnessing this extremism on a daily basis? What it's really about is how opposing views are antithetical to their power. That's what it's really about. It threatens the scope and the size of the bureaucracy. And if it's threatening the scope and the size of the bureaucracy, doesn't it threaten their way of life? See, if I'm talking about downsizing government, eliminating government agencies because they're ineffective, incompetent, they abuse their power, the ideological corruption, then I'm going to be declared an anti-government, anti-authority extremist, not because I represent an actual threat, but because eliminating power from their hands, from the hands of the bureaucracy, and returning it back to the states and the people, it represents a threat to their existence. That's the truth. And that's why they are terrified. See, if they admit that terrorism is at an all-time low and the threats are minimal, they can't justify their bloated budgets. They can't justify expanding their powers. So they have to create the threat. That's the true danger. The true danger lies in the unchecked expansion of government power. Our alphabet agencies, that have been involved in this egregious abuse of power, they need to be punished. They need to be held accountable. They from launching baseless investigations into political figures that they don't like to amassing a massive amount of data on American citizens, they've gone too far. They've gone so far that they even monitored sitting members, duly elected members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. See, they built out this massive censorship apparatus to silence any opposition. Doesn't matter if it's Democrat opposition or Republican opposition, period. And it's an assault. It's an assault on our values. Our founding fathers understood the perils of an ever-expanding government. They recognized that with increased power, not only comes the potential for abuses, but it definitely leads to abuses. And they implored us, we the people, see, we failed too, because they implored us to ask questions, to question the government, to scrutinize policies, to challenge authority. That was our role. That was our job. See, once you stay quiet and go along with all this nonsense, the abuses only get worse. And the crazy part is that if the founding fathers were here today, guess what? They would be labeled as anti-government. They would be labeled as anti-authority extremists. So it should serve as a reminder that we never shy away from questioning those in power. More importantly, we have to recommit to the principles that define our nation. We have to stand against this ideological corruption that has taken over our institutions. We have a duty to protect our republic from those who want to manipulate it for their own gain. It's so important that we do just that. Now, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, I want to talk quickly about the speakership because I think there's a little bit of an overreaction out there, and I'm going to target that when we get back, so hang tight. P.A.S. report listeners, our government is out of control. Criminal tax hikes, hyperinflation, a full-blown recession. It's part of the grand plan. The billions of dollars Biden keeps sending to the corrupt government in Ukraine, the trillions in new taxes he wants to shove down your throat, the electronic banking system crash that resets everyone to zero, checking accounts, saving accounts, 401ks, IRAs, all of it, zero. But you don't have to be a victim. Protect your money and get up to $10,000 in free silver to do it when you call Goldco. Goldco's helped protect over $2 billion in gold and silver for people like you and me. They're offering you up to $10,000 in bonus silver when opening a qualified IRA account just for being a supporter of the P.A.S. report. So whether you want to protect $50,000 or $500,000 or more, this is your opportunity to protect yourself from our out-of-control government. Don't be a victim and call Goldco today. 855-656-0196, 855-656-0196, or go to goldco.com/PAS report. Welcome back, everyone. So as far as the speakership goes, last week, McCarthy was ousted from his position. And of course, the media, the pundits, and the Democrats, they were apoplectic. You know, the Republicans, they're incompetent. They're chaos. This is a clown show. We're not going to survive. The GOP is unfit to govern. It was funny. They talk about the party of chaos and the enormous institutional damage that was done. But it's a joke. There's no truth to that. You know, listen, there are certainly some ramifications. I'm not saying that it's great when we see a speaker ousted from their position. I'm not arguing that. Okay, but this really isn't that big of a deal. Now, in my opinion, I would have preferred to have seen Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel ousted from their positions before McCarthy was ousted. Okay, to me, they're a million times worse. I'm not the biggest fan of McCarthy, but he can at least say that since he's been the Republican leader in the House, the Republicans have gained seats in every single election. Okay, McConnell and McDaniel can't say that. He can. And also understand the nature of the Speaker of the House. It's an extremely difficult position. Like, I don't know who would want it. When you have such a tight majority, it's difficult. You got a difficult dance that you have to do. You're the Speaker of the whole House, both Democrats and Republicans. And then at the same time, you have to manage all the different factions within your political party. You have to keep it together, which is not easy to do. Another problem that Speaker McCarthy had is that he only controls the House. I think that the expectations are a little too high. People don't realize how the system works. I hear Republicans constantly complaining that the House doesn't do anything. And I get it. But realistically, what do you expect them to do? What do you want them to do? You know, too many people don't understand the actual process of how the system works. When you only have one house, you're extremely limited in what you could do. In any event, I think the coverage of this was certainly overblown. And listen, McCarthy, he was the weakest Speaker of the House in modern times. I called it when he was first appointed. In order to become Speaker, he made the deal that a single congressperson can make a motion for him to vacate the speakership. This was always his Achilles heel, and this was going to happen sooner or later. Actually, I'm a little surprised that he lasted this long. Now, there's a lot of disagreement within the Republican caucus, and Speaker McCarthy's demise, was it really all that different from the last 3 out of 4 speakers? I mean, just look at Newt Gingrich, John Boehner, Paul Ryan. They were all forced out of the speakership. Sure, it wasn't through a motion to vacate, but they were forced out by their own behind the scenes. Remember, in politics, it's never the opposition that brings you down. It's usually going to come from those closest to you. Julius Caesar learned that the hard way as Brutus plunged a dagger in his back. Just look at Emperor Cuomo, right? Same thing. Emperor Cuomo wasn't taken down by Republicans. It's not that the Republicans took him out. He was taken down by Democrats. Politics is a blood sport. It's brutal. And the only difference between Democrats and Republicans is that the Republicans will fight amongst themselves in public view. Democrats, they know how to keep things behind closed doors and present themselves as if they're a united front, but they're not. They fight like tooth and nail behind the scenes too. For Democrats to claim that Republicans plunged the House into chaos, that's hysterical to me. And the reason it's hysterical is because every single Democrat voted to remove McCarthy from the speakership. Every single Democrat, everyone complains about Congressman Matt Gaetz. Well, every single Democrat voted with Matt Gaetz. If 8 Democrats voted to support McCarthy, we would still have our Speaker of the House, but they didn't. So if that's the argument you want to make, well, then the Democrats actually voted for chaos, did they not? The Democrats actually voted for this. They supported this. But here's the real deal. It's not a big deal. And within a few days, maybe a week, as of this recording, we don't have a speaker yet. But sooner or later, there's going to be a new speaker. Life is going to go on. We're a free country. Sometimes the process in a free country, it looks really ugly at times. It seems chaotic. But that's only because it's a free country and everything's in public view. And I agree, it looks ugly in the international system. I mean, right now you have countries like Communist China telling their people, look at what freedom looks like. Do you really want that? You get a president who doesn't even know where he is, who doesn't know what he's saying. You have senators like McConnell that would just stop talking and have brain freezes and just stare at cameras. You have Fetterman. You have the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. McCarthy getting ousted. It does look chaotic. So you got China and they're laughing. They're telling people, do you really want a system like that where the White House and the Senate are better suited for nursing homes than anything else? But the truth is, that is what a free society is about. I keep hearing this idea of unity. When were we ever unified? If you want unity in government, then go to North Korea, go to Communist China, Putin's Russia, Cuba. Unity exists in authoritarian societies because dissent is not allowed. Chaos is not allowed. Public opposition is not allowed. So if you want unity, well, then you want authoritarianism. Free societies, things look ugly. There's going to be fights. There's going to be disagreements. And everyone should like the fact that Republicans disagree with each other. Everyone should like the fact that Democrats will disagree with themselves, because that's the way conflict has been internalized within the system. And the more conflict there is within the system, the better protected we are. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, the funny part of this whole thing, the funniest aspect is going to be the irony, because I could guarantee you the next Speaker of the House is actually going to be more conservative than McCarthy was. All the Democrats, they voted to remove McCarthy. It may come back to haunt them. Because what happens when someone like Jim Jordan, who is far more conservative and has a really good shot at being the next Speaker of the House, what happens if he becomes the Speaker? How are they going to regret it? It's going to be interesting to watch that. With that being said, I hope you found the content of this episode informative. If you did, please leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating and take 30 seconds to write a review on any podcast platform that allows it. Make sure to share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. And don't forget to visit the P.A.S. Report website, PASreport.com. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back next week with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.